Alright, hello everyone. This is CounterYolo again, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And after a bit of work, I finally have this comparisons video ready to go for you all in terms of the support carriers inside of this game. Now, in my personal opinion, with the way that science carriers work inside of this game, there should be much more emphasis on the hangar pets instead of the actual starships themselves. As thus, we're actually going to have two different comparison sections. One very brief, going over some of the comparable starships in the game, and then a decent set of slides going over some of the other various hangar pets inside this game. Now, I'm not going to be doing and showing like DPS numbers. That varies a lot based upon runs that you're doing, the different scenarios that you're doing, etc. I imagine I might actually do a bunch of tests with hangar pet DPS. I don't have access to every pet in the game, but I have access to every pet that isn't, well, that's available outside of the exchange. Like if it's available from fully C-store, something like that, I have access to it on my account. In terms of the other things, I might have to ask for some of your help to do the rest of those DPS parsings eventually over time. I'll start with a brief overview in terms of science carriers and how they are in their predicament they are today, and then we'll go over the four new carriers and their hangar pets and such versus some other ones inside the game, and why I think some of those other pets do a relatively good amount of damage in the game, despite the fact that some of them have really poor AI and still do okay somehow. Then I'll super briefly go over the trade and console, which are both pretty garbage, frankly, and then we'll do a TLDR at the end. Feel free to see time links in the description or in the time bar at the bottom of your screen. Now, when it comes to science carriers, and it is really important to talk about this, prior to Delta Rising, so let's go back a lot of years at this point. Prior to Delta Rising, prior to Tier 6 starships, none of the science ships in the game had secondary deflectors. I think this is really important to point out. It wasn't until Delta Rising came out that we got Tier 6 starships, and the Cryptic realized, hey, escorts and science vessels need a little bit of a boost. And so after a few months, they added a heavy weapon slot to escorts. That slot eventually was renamed into the experimental weapon slot that we know of today. And I've talked about it a lot in several other Starship Comparisons videos. And for science vessels, most of the science vessel subtypes in the game got a secondary deflector, which gave them a lot of extra DPS boosting, frankly, and basically made it to the point that for most science vessels, like, it doesn't matter that they're down 1 to 2 weapons versus cruisers and science and escorts. That secondary deflector can give them 25%, like 33%, maybe even 50% of their overall damage on their starship. Science carriers, science vessels that have, well, vessels that have commander science and 2 hangar bays was the lone exception to all of this change in terms of at least to overall for Tier 6 starships. There's also the Vo'Quv science vessel or support vessel that also didn't get a secondary deflector either. Those are the only ones in my mind that I can think of right now that didn't get secondary deflectors. That one's a bit stranger than actual carriers. Carriers makes more sense. You've got 2 hangar bays. If you added a secondary deflector, it would become the de facto science vessel to choose because, hey, I can just focus on all my abilities, and then I have 2 hangar pets that could potentially do over 30k DPS in a lot of runs, which, as I said in my budget build videos, a lot of times 30 to 50k is where a lot of the community sits at, frankly. Like after they've done a lot of their budget stuff, a lot of people sit there, and for most advanced content, that's actually comfortable. If you want to push elite content, you obviously need to get to around 100k DPS, generally speaking. But at least for advanced content, those hangar pets for all those players could carry them on their own for a lot of different content. Whether that should be the case remains to be seen. Here's just the base stats for these support carriers. The bridge after seating and normal stats are the exact same. It's just the hold and shield ratio, and then there's faction specific things that are different. So the Cajun ship and the Romulan ship both have the exact same hold and shields. The Klingon ship, like normal, has a little bit higher hull, a little bit lower shields, and the Gemini Vanguard ships have a bit higher shields and much lower hull. And when it comes to this versus the fleet variants, as you can see here, the Federation and Klingon versions get a new skin, and the Romulan and Gemini versions do not. What this basically means for y'all is that's really the incentive to get a faction-only carrier, is that you're getting a skin along with like the trading console and such, and the discount for the fleet version. If all you really care about is just the performance and don't care about the looks, the Romulan or the Gemini Vanguard one is going to be better. It all depends upon really whether you value the battle cloak, or if you value the unique Romulan drone ships available from the Scimitar that could be equipped on the Romulan support carrier, because those are really good frigates, one of the best in the entire game for DPS. If you don't care about those types of things, overall I'd probably still say the Gemini Vanguard carrier is probably the best of the support carriers, because you got the wingman mechanic alongside being able to have 2 hangar bays. So you get like almost like a pseudo 3rd hangar bay with the Gemini Vanguard ships. These ships are all available from Tier 3 military, by the way. In the past, and this is something to point out as well, in the past, like if you look at all of the Tier 5 ships that have a hangar bay, all of the Tier 5 ships pretty much are at Tier 5 military. It's also the same reason why if you want fleet hangar pets for your ultra rare rarity, you have to wait until Tier 5 stuff for your fleet in order to be able to get stuff for your hangar. Because when the carriers were initially introduced into the game, they weren't meant to be meta at all. They're meant to just be fun things to fly. And this is actually explained a bit after Victory's Life came out, and why they significantly nerfed some of the traits around hangar pets, because they're like, no, we want carriers and stuff to be fun, not necessarily the meta. Because they want skill expression in the actual DPS numbers that players are actually doing. Overall, when it comes to hangar pets, when I was preparing this video, I counted at least 75 different hangar pets that are equipable on player starships in the game right now. So for those of you that are like, oh yeah, Reddit has a decent comprehensive list, do they? I would personally beg to differ, frankly. You might say, oh, well, these pets don't matter. Okay. If they don't matter, what's still the damage of them? I would really like to know, like, how bad are Orion Slaver pets? You know, how bad are some of these other pets that people are like, yeah, they're not going to do good numbers, but how bad is the numbers versus the other weird things that they give you? But anyway, that tangent aside, there's 3 different rarities of hangar pets. There's rare rarity, which are like the standard ones you get off of carriers whenever you buy them. You can also buy those rarity ones strictly from the energy credit store. If you want very rare, you can just go to the lithium store. Checking the energy credit store or the lithium store is an easy way to basically check and see what hangar pets you currently have access to. Keep in mind, there are a lot of starships in the game that give you extra access to other hangar pets that can be used on all starships. You do have to actually claim the starship. It's not like the Admiralty system in which like it's just like automatically added to your hangar pet like roster of availability. You do actually have to actually claim and like open the starship itself to get access to their pets. Ultra rarity again is only from the fleet store at Tier 5. If you don't have a Tier 5 fleet store, talk around with someone else to get access to a different fleet store in order to get those better pets. Keep in mind though, depending on what type of hangar pet you're going for, you might not get that much benefit from an advanced or elite pet versus a regular one. In terms of the 3 general classes of hangar pets, there's fighters, heavy fighters, and frigates. The heavy fighter subclass has pretty much been ignored entirely in the game. It still exists, in which you only have 2 pets per wing with 4 pets in total per hangar bay. Fighters and frigates is basically what Cryptic has basically pushed towards, and it's a lot of that is because of how the meta has shifted. Basically, it's now you pick fighters to either look cool, do lots of damage, or do some other extra effects. if it's just straight damage, generally speaking, fighters is going to be the way to go. There are some frigates that do really good damage as well and can out DPS fighters, but for the most part, fighters is the way to go for damage. For frigates, they have the highest HP. As you can see over there, there actually is a frigate in the game that once you add the 10% whole HP, if it gets to 5 stars, it can actually go above 100,000 whole for a frigate. And that's because it's a certain frigate from the Vo'Quv carrier. It's why a lot of us really like that bird of prey, and why we really hope that Vo'Quv, the tier 6 Vo'Quv gets patched so we can actually use that bird of prey frigate on the new Vo'Quv carrier. Yeah, in terms of the base stats, fighters have really low HP, heavy fighters are kind of in the middle, and frigates have a lot of HP. The obelisk swarmers from the fleet have ridiculously low HP of like less than 5,000 base hull. Keep in mind that with some of these base hull numbers that I'm using, I had to actually search and manually get these myself. They are not available from the actual tooltips inside the game. As some of you may have seen when I posted that on Twitter, because I was getting a little frustrated. And then when I asked about it on stream, Kale just showed the tooltip. The normal tooltip, like without actually clicking the actual hanger pet that's launched. Because the tooltip doesn't have an HP total or an HP ratio. Doesn't have maneuverability either, which I would personally really like, because there's some fighters and stuff that are slower than others. It's nice to know that, because that does make a difference for DPS numbers. But anyway, there's just some stuff there for the ranges. We'll get more into it in just a bit. Again, as I alluded to earlier, for rare versus rare versus ultra rare, one thing that I experimented with, because I had to click every single hanger pet myself to, figure out base whole HP, I decided to buy a whole bunch of rare, and ultra rare of all these different ones. And I realized rarity doesn't affect the base HP at all. It just doesn't. Which means if you're getting the more expensive pets, there's got to be something else that you're getting for it, because it's not going to be durability. It's either going to be damage or extra abilities or enhancements that the pet's going to be doing. For the most part, it's the extra weapons that you care about. If it's just a slightly higher rank of an ability, it's generally not going to matter that much. And generally speaking, in this game, frigates get a bit like almost all the weapons straight from the get-go, while a lot of the better fighters, you have to get the higher ranks or the higher rarities in order to get those full amounts of weapons. Which is why, generally speaking, for fighters and heavy fighters, you want them at the maximum rarity possible. Frigates, unless you're trying to squeak out the highest DPS possible, the standard rarity is completely fine. Which is why frigates are really nice inside this game. Also, whenever you go to Reddit or some other place and talk about what's the best pet in the game, you need to ask them, okay, if you're doing your testing, are you using particular traits that make, for instance, fighters survive a lot longer, like scramble fighters? Or are you just saying, no, just a straight pet that I just slot in my hanger base, and then I just use my normal DPS build for weapons or science or whatever, and then those pets just do extra damage alongside it just to inflate your overall numbers. There are those, or you maybe like the Styx, for instance, has really strong pets for debuffing, or of course the Tholian Grumo for any types of builds has some really nice pets there too. And there's other ones that people just pick because they have really cool visuals or have fun little sounds and enhancements. It's why a lot of people like the squadrons inside the game right now. It makes them feel cool about being a carrier. I like the squadrons because they happen to get more threat than a lot of other pets inside the game right now, which is why I use them. But that's just me. In terms, especially if you're going to use frigates, it's important to lower the hanger recharge a little bit. It's another reason why science carriers should be the best carriers inside the game in terms of enhancing their frigates, because having higher auxiliary power does lower the cooldown of your frigates or in fighters in terms of being able to launch them. There's also some flight deck officers that you can use that have a cooldown variant. And then also just choosing any starship with 2 hanger bays is going to be fine too, because two hanger base starships that are at least tier 5 or tier 6, so they have that starship mastery in there. One of the Starship things in there is it lowers the cooldown of launching fighters and frigates and such. So the combination of those three things, especially for science, is going to give you just about the lowest recharge speed possible for your fighters and for your frigates, which can matter for some various other traits inside the game. Now, for Starship Comparisons, again, there's going to be two sections for this. There's going to be the real Starship Comparisons, which is just the starships. There's only going to be 4 slides for this because it's going to be one for each starship. Again, the emphasis of this video is going to be the hangar pets, not the starships themselves. I think that's what's more important to focus on for this video. So for starships, here's the Federation version, which is the Cation Atrox. Comparing it versus its old Tier 5U variant, it gets an additional engineering ability, and its Lieutenant Commander Science is turned into a Lieutenant Commander Universal seat that gets command abilities there too. It's also got a little bit higher hull and shield HP versus its Tier 5U counterpart, and then there's also the Jupiter carrier over there too, which has that same shield ratio as the new support carrier, but it has a little bit lower hull HP. The Fleet Jupiter is the only fighter ship that can launch Callisto frigates. Those frigates are some of the worst frigates in the game, but you know, they are cool looking frigates. I will not deny that. But anyway, in terms of the KDF stuff, we have the KDF Vo'Quv support carrier, which again is just another upgrade over a Tier 5U. It's got higher hull and shields. It's much higher shields, just a little bit higher hull. And its Lieutenant Science is turned into Lieutenant Commander Universal Command. So you're able to get a potential extra science ability if you really want to. If you want to go more tactical or engineering or whatever, you definitely can too. Also of note is that the Fleet Vo'Quv, the Tier 6 one, does get a cloak. I don't remember. To my recollection, I don't remember the Tier 5U having a cloak. It's been a little while since I've flown that ship, to be honest. At least on the STO wiki, the Tier 5U Vo'Quv does not have a cloak. Clearly on the blog, the Fleet Tier 6 Vo'Quv does have a cloak, so keep that in mind. Harvey Battle Carrier is the other noteworthy Klingon specific carrier. Technically, the Farang is kind of like the successor to this ship in many ways, because even though it's technically a science carrier, it's really more reminiscent of the Dreadnought carriers, which are Commander Tactical, because it's got 5 tactical abilities on this thing and 7 weapons, like you think of for a typical Dreadnought carrier. Now, as for Romulan ships, there's only one other Romulan science carrier, so I decided just to put in here the promo Dreadnought Warbird as well. It's also got a Lance ability, but I just didn't put it on here. It's the same kind of useful command, just like the new support carrier, but it's also got Commander Temper Operative. It doesn't have quite as many science abilities as for the potential, but it does have stuff if you really want to do it. The CounterYolo is the other interesting carrier because its stats are quite a bit lower than the new support carrier, but there's a lot more other potential options with this carrier, because you've got a Lieutenant Commander Universal and a Lieutenant Universal seating in it. So depending upon what you want to do with the ship, there is a lot of ways to go with it. You could go full science with this with the CounterYolo by far. Even though you do have a Lieutenant seat, which isn't ideal, it's Lieutenant Temper Operative, so you can use that Lieutenant engineering ability for Temper Operative stuff instead of engineering and go more science oriented fully on the ship itself. You just don't have a secondary deflector to help out with things. It's also a 4-2 lat instead of 3-3 like all these support carriers are. So there is that as well to think about. Both the Talaru and the Romulan support carrier can use the drone frigates from the Tier 5 and Tier 6 scimitars. So, and those frigates are some of the best DPS frigates in the entire game, in terms of like the general purpose slot and frigate types of DPS. Only really the Breen frigates pretty much can actually out DPS them, and that's because Breen frigates have Raider flanking on their frigate stuff, which is one of the unique things about those frigates. As for the Jem'Hadar ships, there's only one of the other science Jem'Hadar carriers. So I'm putting in the Dreadnought carrier here too, because the Gemini attack ships for hangar bays are really iconic too, and those usable on the Dreadnought carrier. In terms of differences between the support carrier versus the classic Gemini Vanguard carrier, basically what it comes down to is, do you want to go super sciencey, or do you really want 4 weapons in the front? If so, the Vanguard carrier might be a little bit better for you. Otherwise, the Fleet Gemini version is available for completely free-to-play players. The classic Vanguard carrier is only available through the C-Store. So just keep that in mind. Which also means, by the way, if you're only going to buy a C-Store and not upgraded to Fleet, the classic Vanguard carrier is actually probably going to be better for you too, because its stats are going to be about the same, but you get an extra console. So just keep that in mind. There are different pros and cons for a lot of these ships. Both of these Vanguard carriers have the wingman mechanic. The classic Gemini carrier does not have the wingman mechanic with it. So there is that too. So now getting to pets. Keep in mind, I am going to have some stats for hull on all of these pets in this video. Again, what I had to do for this is I had to, in order to get the hull, you have to actually launch the pet itself and then click on the individual pet and get things to pop up. What I did for this to keep it consistent was I went to the place right outside of Earth Space Dock and right outside of Chronosphere City, and I made sure that all my traits were basically off, and that my skill tree was set so that I had the max HP stuff in the bottom part of the tactical part of the skill tree all selected, because I imagine I'm going to be getting lots more people that are probably going to help me with some of these base hull stats things, and most of them that actually care about carriers and have these things are probably going to have that filled anyway. So I just have that there to keep it consistent with all the other data that I am currently getting, and I'm still getting from more other players inside this game too. Of course, I mean, the tooltips in here are somewhat wrong. I mean, this is a promo D7 with tactical fighters that say that their group is Starfleet instead of KDF. So there definitely going to be some inconsistencies in here, and hopefully Cryptic eventually adds different things to make it clear as to how strong different things are inside the game. Because we don't have raw shield ratios or whole ratio stuff, I have to go with just the raw numbers that I collected. But you can see a lot of the exact sames because I did this fairly consistently throughout both without going through all of this stuff. In terms of the support frigates, because I did buy the pack so I could do this for you all, these 3 support frigates all have the exact same hull and exact same abilities. It's just that the weapon type is different between them. Cation ones have Tetra, which is cool. That means that hopefully we might get a new space set for Tetra that's based around the Cations, so that we actually get something really good for them. The male obviously around is G Plasma, so there's that, and Gemini is Polaron. Unlike other frigates, there actually is incentives to upgrade these things to advanced and elite. At advanced or very rare rarity, you get suppression barrage 3, which is pretty nice. In terms of the suppression parts of the frigates, if all you care about is damage, you do have to go to elite, because at elite you do get an extra weapon, and you also get sensor scam, which debuffs an enemy, which lowers their damage resistance rating a bit and makes them basically get blown up faster. Both those are pretty good based on what you want to do. If all you care about is just the suppression from your frigates, all you need is advanced. In terms of the KDF version, if you want to look at this for a moment, the KDF version actually has a little bit less hull than the other versions. And I double checked this, and this is actually how it is, even though the abilities are the exact same. I am hoping that Cryptic did this a little bit so that the KDF version would be allowed to do more DPS as a frigate versus the other variants. If that's not the case, then I'm not going to be very happy whenever people start doing more and more DPS parsing. So, especially for y'all that are doing parsing for the frigates, I want you to really pay attention to the KDF one versus the other 3. The other three is probably just clone copies. The KDF-1 should be different in some way. So please let us all know, comments or on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, wherever, in terms of why the KDF version it actually has lower HP versus the other ones. Cool. All right. So again, disruptors and everything else is generally speaking the same. Also of note is the restrictions that they placed on these new support frigates is that they said the restriction was full carriers. It was very clear. I could even call this from like a mile away. Full carriers are carriers that have two hangar bays. Starships with two hangar bays have their Starship Mastery modified so that they can launch hangar pets faster. So effectively, like if you're using a two hangar carrier and not using your pets that much at all, you're actually gimping your own build because of that. Anyway, alongside that, we also have the Gemini attack ship and Gemini Vanguard gunboats. Those are also both pretty good frigates as well. Vanguard gunboats are a little bit more usable on a bit more Gemini starships. Gemini attack ships are only usable really on just a couple of select few Gemini ships in particular. Keep in mind, when I was initially testing, the Gemini Vanguard support carrier could not use Vanguard gunboats. I do expect Cryptic to add a patch that gives the Gemini Vanguard support carrier access to the Vanguard gunboats, because that would be really silly if they can't use gunboats, like permanently. Also keep in mind, because I did not explain this, because I am color deficient and I wanted this to pop a little bit more for at least for me when I review this later. In terms of weapons and abilities, stuff in white is stuff that is available to all of the variants, rare, very rare, and ultra rare. The blue ones are the stuff that's available at very rare and ultra rare, and if it's in yellow/gold, it's only available at the highest rarity, at ultra rare, like the ones you have to get from your fleet, or in a couple of rare circumstances, like from reputations or stuff like that. All right, so moving on. Between these two Gemini frigates, by the way, the Gemini attack ships is much better for single target. Gunboats use fire and will, so it's a bit better for multiple targets. Also use, yeah. And of course, with more frigates, this is the famous bird of prey that's from the Vo'Quv carrier. This ship has a ridiculously high amount of full HP. Whenever you also consider that, whenever pets level up, they get between, in that 5-star, they get like an additional like 10% hull HP. You add 10% to 93k hull. This ship is this frigate. It's going to have over 100k hull HP whenever it's at 5 stars, and because it has so much HP built into it already, there's a good chance that if a TFR or something goes long, that these types of frigates are going to get to 5 stars. They do. They do some decent damage. I did not change this, so I am going to include in the description what the actual weapons and abilities are for this bird of prey. I don't have time to go back and re-record this video, unfortunately. So I'm going to fix that after I finish this video, and I will also fix that for the PDF upload that's going to be coming out shortly after I upload this video. For the Romulan drone ships, those are available from the C store, from Tier 5 and Tier 6 scimitars, and they're usable on the scimitars alongside the TLDR carrier warbird, as well as the new Romulan support warbird, support carrier warbird as well. And for these ships, they use beam overload and beam fire will 1 through 3 with multiple beam arrays and a torpedo. Those change depending upon the enemy that you're fighting, which is what makes these ships fun as well. On their own, they look kind of ugly, but the moment that you fight a particular enemy, whatever enemy you're fighting, they will basically use the hollow emitters to basically change the ship as well as the weapons that they're using to basically mimic the thing that they're fighting, which is super cool. Like if you're fighting Federation ships, your drone ships turn into NX escorts, which is so cool. Anyway, the Terran Empire frigates, are some of the best debuffing frigates in the game because they get at the highest rank. It gets access to attack pattern beta 3 as well as suppression barrage 3. So, and at ultra you also get an omni beam alongside the other stuff. So it is a pretty strong starship. It's got really good hull. Basically, if you discount the Vo'Quv bird of prey, it is tied for the highest hull HP of all the frigates in the game too. Pretty much. Of course, there are the close to light escorts, the light escort frigates. Those are pretty garbage too. Because they use quad cannons and dual cannons in the turret. Hopefully the AI gets fixed and these actually are good. If they're actually able to stay on target, they should do decent damage, but they just don't. First eye frigates have the same types of issues as well. Actually, some of the bigger issues with them is that it has 2 torpedoes and a mine. So, yeah, and frigates don't have, the recollect mine ability thing that players do. So, there's that. Now, the plush frigate is also the other one that ties for the lowest HP in terms of frigates inside the game. What makes this ship good? And I'm just gonna make this clear right now. The 2 things that makes it really, really good, its tachyon beam is really powerful. And alongside that, what keeps it competitive versus other frigates is that it's the only one, to my understanding, that has access to raider flanking. The only one that I'm aware of that has access to raider flanking. And that's at all ranks. And tachyon beam's available at all ranks too. So yeah, if you have access to the Breen carrier and a Breen frigate, and one of the Breen raiders alongside it, you will not be disappointed for having Breen frigates on your Breen carrier. It is going to really do well in terms of damage. Now for this one slide is our kind of like middle of the road starships. These are the starships that are in the heavy fighter category, kind of like in the middle, instead of only having instead of unlike frigates that you only have up to 2 per hangar bay. These ones you can have 4, and these ones have the whole HP of basically like the lower end of your of a lot of your frigates, pretty much. And they're kind of middle of the road in terms of survival and damage as well. They aren't really remarkable, but they are decent too. Runabouts and Delta Flyers both do decent. In my opinion, Delta Flyers do things a little bit better than Danube Roundabouts, but maybe that's just with me on personal preferences there, because in my opinion, Quantum Torps do a little bit better because they recharge faster than the Chronoton Torps. At least just in my experience. Also, Delta Flyers just look cooler. In terms of the new fighter squadrons, keep in mind here's the 3 non-Klingon ones. They'll have the same whole HP as well, and it's unlocked based upon whatever thing that's from it. Vacation one's from the Federation carrier. Scorpion Squadron is from the Romulan carrier. The Gemini Fire Squadron is from the Gemini Vanguard carrier. They don't have any restrictions, so if you get that ship, you can now actually open it up on your character, and then you can claim fighter squadrons for. So you only pay the price for it for any other character, as long as they also claim that ship for free from the C-store, or if you get it from the fleet, you need to go and buy the ship again from your fleet to get access to the hangars. It wasn't super clear to me on the actual descriptions as to how many of the pulse cannons and things that these ships would have. So I'm just putting question marks there. I'm sure within the next week or so, the S2 Wiki will be updated as to how many they actually have. Again, Cation stuff does Tetrion, Scorpion stuff does Plasma, and Gemini stuff does Polaron. And those weapons and abilities there are reflective of how the description is on at least the blog description. And versus the regular fighters, these ships versus the regular ones actually have the exact same whole HP, which is interesting because the KDF one is not that way. And there's just the other abilities there. The Scorpion fighters are actually available from Romulan reputation. In terms of just normal fighters, at least for the Federation side, they're actually decent. the elite Scorpion fighters are basically on par with like the Peregrine fighters in terms of damage, so they actually are fine there. And keep in mind, you really can only get non-epic or non-elites Scorpion fighters if you have it from the olden days. Nowadays, you can only really get elite Scorpion fighters from Raw reputation. You used to be able to get the other variants there as well, but now it's just elite, and they balance the ships accordingly because of that. In terms of the KDF version, as you can see here, the fighter squadron has lower HP than the classic Toju's fighters. And as you can see in the next slide, the Toju's fighters and the Peregrine fighters have basically the exact same layout in terms of their weapons. The difference is that the KDF Toju's fighters have an additional 50% extra base hull HP. It is for this exact reason as to why Toju's fighters, in most DPS runs, you will see them do more damage than Peregrine fighters, because, I mean, if everything is equal, one ship can survive 50% easier than another starship, well, it's probably going to do more damage. Especially when it comes to fighters, and a lot of them will blow up from time to time. So Toju's fighter squadrons have a little bit less hull HP, which means I am guessing the fighter squadron is probably going to be balanced accordingly to do a little bit more damage than the classic Toju's fighters. That's just my gut feeling. I'm not 100% sure on that. Maybe it does much worse and it's just complete garbage. I don't know. Whenever y'all start experimenting with things, when I get more time and I eventually get to start experimenting with things, we'll basically find out. In terms of Nautican Stinger fighters, that one is from the Colossi Siege Destroyer. It is a tier 5 starship. I think there might be a tier 6 version now too. I need to check and see. But generally speaking, in terms of general purpose DPS for fighters, this is one of the best fighters in the entire game. Not, relatively speaking, low. It's got the standard low HP. In terms of fighters, it does really good damage. It does really good damage. Like, those of y'all who think like, yeah, like the Kelvin Vengeance's pets are good. These pets are basically on par with the Kelvin Vengeance's pets. Okay, and this is an account. You can get this from the C store, and it's account unlocked. Basically, one purchase, account unlocked of these types of pets for all of your KDF captains and KDF allied captains. And so, in terms of from a hanger pet perspective, there is some really strong incentives to play KDF in terms of hanger pets anyway. For Federation side of things, there are the Kelvin Timeline Assault drones. They are fine. You are going to want them to get to old. You want ultra rare for their pets, just because at that point is when you get Fire Will. Before that, their beam weapons don't actually get enhancements. So you are going to want the higher ranks of the Kelvin Timeline pets for sure. And Peregrine fighters are basically just a weaker version of the Toju's fighters, and their phaser instead of disruptor. Now, there are two different time ships in the game for pets. They're both from the Paradox Dreadnought. It basically depends on whether you're Federation or Federation aligned versus KDF or KDF aligned as to what visual variant you're going to get. They both do anti-proton, and they both do the exact same damage, and both have the exact same hull. I know that because I have a Paradox Dreadnought. I'm both a KDF and a Federation captain. And yeah, I looked at this manually. They are respectable in terms of damage as well. Again, though, time ships are about on par in many ways to the Kelvin Assault drones. And again, for the KDF side of things, Nautican Stinger fighters are just much cheaper. So in my opinion, still for KDF side, I still go with Nautican Stinger fighters because all things being equal, but one thing is cheaper than another, just go with a cheaper thing. Sure, yes, time ships look a little bit cooler. So there is that too. Now, of course, I know a lot of people really like the promo pack Tactical Attack Squadron or Attack Fighters. Same stats between the Federation and KDF version, just different visuals, and Federation 1 does phasers, KDF 1 does disruptor damage. Whip-de-doo relates like the same thing. Big thing there, of course, is that because the lower 7,000 whole HP is where you're expecting for a fighter. Pretty much, these ships have closer to 10,000 whole HP. So, and it's because of that they visually look really great, and because of their huge amount of omni beams on them, they do consistent damage. But overall, they should do a bit less damage than several other types of pets inside this game. Now, in my experimentation in terms of tanking, even though they do a bit less damage, they seem to draw a little bit more threat than some of the other pets that are available inside of the game, which is why for a lot of my tanks, I do veer towards these ships on the Federation side because I've got the Legendary Bundle. I also looked into a promo D7 when I was getting some low buy in order to buy out the summer ship because I haven't been able to play daily because of work, things. And work things have been happening with COVID here in Missouri to help things out. But anyway, the tactical ships are fine. There are ships that are much better in terms of damage than those fighters, though. So just keep that in mind. Lost Souls of Grethor are perfectly fine too. They're more like melee pets, so they're definitely fun. They're like your standard whole HP for fighters. A lot of people on Reddit seem to like Obelisk Swarmers a lot. They have ridiculously low HP versus like all the other pets in comparison. Like they've got like 50% less HP than a lot of your standard fighters. So they're super flimsy. Yes, they have beam overload, and they're from the Fleet Spire, so they're a little bit cheaper depending upon what you have access to. But they're very flimsy. So if you actually want them to do really good damage, you probably are going to want the Scramble Fighters trait off the exchange, which is not cheap. So in terms of comparisons, I'm not sure if I would say the Obelisk Swarmers is really one of the better fighters to get, but it's there for you to think about. Oh, and Lost Souls of Grethor, like the Psionic Shockwave thing, is really bad. Stick with the classic Lost Souls of Grethor because again, higher rarities for pets that don't increase their survival, and Psionic Shockwave is just really bad. So just stick with the classic Lost Souls of Grethor rare rarity instead of very rare or ultra rare. All right. In terms of the trade and console, I'll make this very simple. In terms of the traits, it gives you extra hull regen for your hanger pets. When we're talking about fighters, this is inconsequential. For fighters, if you want them to survive, you really need something like Scramble Fighters as a starship trait to allow them to survive, get lots of extra healing and some invulnerability. They have to in order to get their higher stars in order to be able to more easily survive. The bigger thing for this trait is the lower cooldown of captain abilities. And yes, high-end captains that have lots of good chance already, thanks to a relatively new space trait, are going to find zero value with this trait. However, low and mid-range captains without really high crit chance and launch a lot of fighters. I missed typing there. Those types of players are going to benefit a lot from this trait. Do I think it's good enough to buy the Starship? Probably not. That's just me. You're buying the Starships either for the full pack for visuals or you know, access to lots of different pets or discounts for the fleet store and such, or for its fleet variants. The console is also pretty garbage as well. Yes, it does some okay accuracy and defense and shield resistance, and it also does an AoE disable. I think to a lot of enemies for a few seconds and a hold. That's okay, I guess. The big thing for this console is that it gives you an additional rank up for your hanger pets whenever you immediately use it. My recommendation is for this console for your hanger builds, especially for like ISE or something, whenever you're trying to, you know, squeeze out as much damage as possible. Initially have this console equipped and use it before the TFO starts. Like during that waiting time, use this right after you launch your your hanger pets to immediately give them an extra star rank up. Then switch out the console for some other console that's much better for damage. And then you basically start the TFO with some hanger pets that have an additional star rank higher. Additional star ranks not only give them a little bit more durability, but actually increases their damage a little bit for each star up. So that might squeeze out a couple thousand extra DPS over the course of the run itself. If you don't really care about that type of gimmick, this is another console which you might, which unless that disable thing's super strong, probably this console is really strong for PvP more than for PvE. Frankly, now that I'm thinking about it, this is probably a PvP console with a tiny gimmick for hanger pets as well because of that rank up for hanger pets. In terms of TLDR, we got some new science carriers. The Federation one looks cool. On the KDF one, it's the tier 6 Vo'Quv carrier that we've been asking for years. We have a Romulan support carrier, which can use the strong drone DPS pets from the Scimitar, so that's super exciting. So now there's a 2-hanger Romulan carrier that non-Romulan captains can use. The Generative Vanguard support carrier, hopefully it's going to be patched to use Generative Vanguard gunboats in the future. Though those are decent frigate pets as well. Obviously not as strong as drone pets, but still fine. And generally speaking, in terms of these types of carriers, this carrier or the classic Generative Vanguard science carrier is what you're probably going to want to use if you're just going to slot in whatever Reddit calls the best universally available hanger pets for DPS. People are probably going to figure that out in the next couple of months, and if that's not a Starship exclusive type of pet, there's some of the new fighters that are actually really good. That's probably going to be the best platform, frankly, for carry DPS because you also get the wingman mechanic. Again, for the trait, the big notable thing for it is captain cooldowns from launching pets, which means the high-end builds are not going to really value this at all because there's other traits that can handle captain cooldowns for you. However, builds without high crit chance will be able to benefit from the trait. I don't think that's particularly worth it enough to buy the ships, but that's just my opinion there. In terms of the console, the big thing for it is either for the PvP aspect, or big thing is really as the gimmick to rank up hanger pets right before a TFO starts, and then switching it out for something better later. Yeah, that's basically it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I am going to be starting work in just a few minutes, so we'll have to wait on regular end of combat discussion stuff for another time. Thank you all for watching today, and enjoy the rest of your day.